Welcome back, my friends, to the not-so-sunshine state rails. A couple weeks back in late February, I made a trip up to northern Georgia to visit with a buddy of mine, Andrew, for a few days, and while I was up there, we'd watch a handful of trains on the CSX and Norfolk Southern main lines that run near his residence. And while I wasn't planning on making any videos about this trip, there was one thing that happened along the way that I found very interesting and figured deserved at least a quick video to, at the very least, show off the shots that we got of it happening. This was our first day watching trains along CSX's W&A subdivision between Chattanooga, Tennessee and Atlanta, Georgia. I visited this line with Andrew a few years back in 2021, and I've covered a lot of that trip in this video here. And let me preface this entire thing by saying, yes, I realize that this occurrence happens in many other places. Yes, I realize that it happens quite often in some of those other places. However, this is my first time having ever seen something like this happen and found it personally very interesting. So let's start from the bottom. This was our first day trackside and we had seen a handful of coal trains already. The W&A and Etowah subdivisions that converge in Cartersville, Georgia are arguably some of the busiest coal routes in the southeast. The W&A side sees all of the coal trains originating from Evansville, Indiana, so that is pretty much every Florida coal train, many South Carolina trains, and their most common contender, the Plant Bowen coal trains that terminate in Stylesboro, Georgia, just north of Cartersville. Such an example was this C305 that we caught in Adairsville on our second to last day. The Etowah side sees pretty much every coal train that originates from Corbin, Kentucky. The Corbin, Kentucky trains tend to run to more uncommon locations, such as coke plants in Georgia, Alabama power plants, and Atkinson, Kentucky in the case of this southbound C729 that is going to be our train of interest today. Originating in Corbin, C729 is a loaded coal train destined for Madisonville, Kentucky and interchange to the Paducah and Louisville Short Line Railroad. The Paducah and Louisville are a common transceiver of coal trains from CSX and Norfolk Southern for transportation to Kentucky and Virginian power plants. C729 is currently pulling into CSX's North Yard on the outskirts of downtown Cartersville for a crew change. The current crew has just brought the train south from Etowah, Tennessee. However, a crew change must be made here because the line that they are about to turn onto requires a separate crew with a different certification for that line. The circuitous part of this train's routing begins right here in Cartersville. Once the new crew is aboard and ready to go, they'll take the train south for about 1,500 feet before turning 140 degrees back to the north onto the W&A main to go north towards Chattanooga. In order to access the Madisonville interchange to the Paducah and Louisville Railway, the train must come south out of Corbin to here at Cartersville, turning back to the north, then running north by northwest to Madisonville, Kentucky. So this is, to my knowledge, the only coal train that will run the W&A or any CSX rails in this region northbound while loaded. The Etowah subdivision effectively ends here as further to the south around the corner it converges with the W&A main into Atlanta, though these guys wouldn't be taking that route as they'd be turning here at Junta to go up the W&A back the other way. The rest of our afternoon was then spent following C729 northward as I knew that when they made it to Tunnel Hill, they would turn westward into some beautiful sunset lighting. So we would simply try to keep with the unique train as best we could, following it through towns such as Adairsville, meeting other trains along the way.
Taking that one to Atlanta? Yeah.
Of further note on the C729 are the hoppers it's pulling marked TVAX. These TVAX reporting marks are evidence of ownership from the Tennessee Valley Authority power plants. I had most recently seen these kinds of hoppers in service on Norfolk Southern's C&O&TP line serving the Tennessee Valley Authority's Kingston fossil plant. And it is fairly uncommon to see Tennessee Valley Authority's rolling stock on CSX rails, especially in this territory, but this is evidence that this train is ultimately serving a Tennessee Valley Authority fossil plant. This shipment is ultimately destined for TVA's Gallatin facility. More on that in a moment. Returning to Tunnel Hill, Georgia, where this video began, C-729 is now emerging from Tunnel Hill into the beautiful direct sunlight of this evening's sunset. And here at Tunnel Hill Siding is where the very unique circumstances that I mentioned at the beginning of this video would unfold.
Detector milepost 109.8.
So, as I mentioned a moment ago, this train is ultimately serving Tennessee Valley Authority's Gallatin fossil plant. The CSX portion of this train will be taken to Madisonville, Kentucky for interchange to the Paducah and Louisville Railway that will take it to their Calvert City terminal. From there, the coal is transferred to barge for transportation to Gallatin, or it is stored on the river until it is needed at the fossil plant. But the process of getting these loads from Corbin to Madisonville, Kentucky requires this odd circuitous routing that involves the W&A here along the way. So it's already unique enough that a coal train is running loaded effectively backwards, but perhaps even more unique is the train they'd be meeting here, another loaded coal train heading southbound. The train in the siding, symboled C904, is a loaded coal train from Evansville, Indiana to Andrews, South Carolina, though this train's routing, however, is a lot more straightforward, a straight southward shot from Indiana to South Carolina. Though it would just so happen that along their way, they would meet at Tunnel Hill, Georgia, an opposing coal train that was also loaded. Once the loaded C-729 got past the south end switch, dispatch could line said switch for the siding to allow C-904 to converge back to the main and continue south. This medium clear indication gives them the right of way.
Tunnel Hill, CSX 595, C904, from south to the base.
Two loaded trains meeting each other in front of a big hill. Yes, once again, I realize that this can happen quite a bit and quite often in some other places, but do consider for a moment that this is not one of those areas. Tunnel Hill, Georgia does not see a lot of loaded coal trains running northward, with C-729, I believe, being the only example. So, at least for this territory, what I can say is that the timing amongst trains had to be pretty good for this to happen just before sundown in Tunnel Hill, Georgia. So, that concludes my short take on two CSX loaded coal trains meeting each other at a siding in opposing directions. Though this is all you're going to see of my 4-day getaway to northern Georgia, Andrew and I would go on to have another couple days of train watching, and we'd ultimately have a very enjoyable time. Thanks nonetheless for tuning into this short take, and I hope to see you pretty soon back down on the Sunshine State rails.